Well, eons ago, back in 1997, there was an art exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. This art exhibit was by an artist named Erica Rothenberg, and it was entitled America's Joyous Future. And one particular piece was incredibly interesting to me. She took a very common, everyday item, something that we're completely familiar with, the church bulletin, and she turned it into art. In the center of this piece of art, there was a calendar of events, not unlike our own. It read like this: evenings at 7 in the parish hall. Monday, Alcoholics Anonymous. Tuesday, abused spouses. Wednesday, eating disorders. Thursday, say no to drugs. Friday, teen suicide watch. Saturday, soup kitchen. Sunday sermon at 9 a.m., America's Joyous Future. So was the artist being ironic? Was she suggesting that we have this pie-in-the-sky religion that's all about a future disconnected from the present, that our faith is somehow oblivious to the struggles and the very hurts of people within our very own walls? Was she being ironic, or was she trying to say something about the power of a loving, redemptive community that welcomes everyone exactly as they are, that brings them together in fellowship with their joys and their sorrows, that is, in fact, the foundation for a joyous future? I think it all depends on how we understand hope. Most of us think of hope as something akin to wishing, right? We hope for good stuff in the future, good events that happen for us and for others that we love. We hope for positive outcomes. And so we feel happy and hopeful when it seems likely that those positive outcomes are about to be made real in the present. We feel hopeless when it seems unlikely that those positive outcomes will actually materialize. This is a really common understanding of hope. It's a fine understanding of hope. It's just that it puts hope perpetually in the future, never in the present, and it means that it's somehow beyond our control, isn't it? It's just something that drops down out of the sky. It appears or it doesn't appear, but it's always somewhere out there. Hope is something we've all been taught is a very good thing, a motivating thing. But if our view of hoping is just wishing for good things in the future, maybe it's a little more complicated than that. Throughout this season of Lent, we have been talking about and reading Brian McLaren's book, Life After Doom. And he says that this version of hope, particularly given all of the perils that we are currently facing in the world, can actually be kind of dangerous. Because hope is a great pacifier, isn't it? When you hope for something in a glorious future, you don't really have to do much in the present. We all know people who hope for stuff, and the hope means we don't really have to change very much. In fact, we may in fact be those people from time to time, right? For example, you get that diagnosis of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, a very real possibility of heart problems, and you go, I hope the statin will fix this because I don't want to exercise, I don't want to stop drinking coffee, I do not want to avoid cheeseburgers. I hope the statin takes care of everything. And we do this also with those huge problems, world problems that seem so much bigger than us, don't we? We look at the environmental destruction, we look at economic inequality and instability and so much uncertainty in our world, and we say, I hope that science, that engineering, that the invisible hand of the market, that the government, someone, somewhere will fix all of it. Because we don't really want to stop driving everywhere in our cars that have very little fuel efficiency. We don't really want to change how we fuel our lives, change what we buy, think about the conditions under which they were made. It sounds like so much work. It sounds like a change we aren't ready to make. So we keep on hoping and doing very little in the present. We do this very same thing with religion, right? God is in control. God is in charge, and God will make everything better. God wants good things for us. And so if God can't fix it in the here and now, at least we are promised a glorious future in heaven. So we don't have to do anything right now because God is in charge of everything. This kind of hope can be an incredible pacifier, and it can also make present circumstances, especially if we're not very happy with present circumstances, feel better. But it has some problems, doesn't it? If we're always focused on the future, we're actually less aware of the joys and the beauties of the present, and we are far less likely to take the necessary action that we actually need to do in the present. If hope is just wishing, then it could be that we're actually engaging in kind of a flimsy complacency that unfortunately makes a much worse future than the one we're hoping for even more likely. Hope is complicated, but hopelessness, well, that's not much better, is it? Many of us watch the news or we read all of the news on our phones, and we feel this sense of hopelessness and helplessness. What can we possibly do? Everything seems to be spiraling in the wrong direction. Nothing seems to get better, and we feel paralyzed. And so we don't take action to change. When we're so happy and focused on a glorious future, we don't change. And when we feel helpless and hopeless, we don't change. Hope is complicated, isn't it? What we actually need is a very different understanding of hope. We need a kind of hope that's grounded in being able to look at reality as it is, to be able to accept responsibility for where we've been and where we are, and to be able to together make changes, make positive changes to bring about a better future. Because the truth is this: the future isn't determined. It's not set in stone. It hasn't already been written, not by God, not by outside forces, not by anyone. The future is yet to be. And knowing that, we can change. We can pick up the pen and write a better story. The former Czech president and playwright Václav Havel says this: hope isn't the same thing as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing regardless of how it turns out. This hope gives us the strength to live and continually try new things, even in conditions that seem hopeless. I think that's the best definition of biblical faithful hope I have ever heard. Hope is the certainty that something is worth doing, regardless of how it turns out, and finding the courage to do it. So the prophet Ezekiel spoke to his people before and during exile, before doom and destruction had their way, and then in the midst of living in a foreign country, occupied, without home, without any kind of hope. Before they were exiled into Babylon, his words to his people, Israel, were harsh. He kept telling them to turn back to God, to do what they knew was right, to practice justice and mercy, to care for the poor, to worship God and God alone, to share their food and their resources. But they would not listen. They would not change. After exile, living in that foreign land, his themes began to change. And he spoke of a time in the future, a time of renewal and restoration. Ezekiel told people how to live with wisdom and courage after doom. And that's why his words are so important for us. He has this prophetic vision in which God takes him up on a high mountain and he looks out over a dry, barren land. No food, no nourishment, no abundance at all, just a valley of bones. People who had lost their lives to war and violence, to complacency, to mistakes. And God asks him, "Mortal, can these bones live?" And he doesn't reply with any of our typical hopeful or hopeless responses. He doesn't offer magical thinking. He doesn't say, "Of course, God, you're here, and so everything is going to be great. Those bones are going to rise up and rattle, and everything is going to be resurrected, and it's going to be perfect." He says, "Only you know, God. Only you know." He doesn't respond with hopelessness and despair either. He doesn't say, "Well, they're just bones. There is no possibility of any better future." He responds with a humble and genuine hope. Only you know. Only you know, God, the mystery of life and death and rebirth. But because only you know, I am willing to do the next right thing. I'm willing to do what you ask of me. And so he begins to prophesy. He begins to look out at that valley of dry bones like they are his neighbors. And he prophesies words of hope and love. He says the day is coming when the great Ruach breath of God will blow over you. The wind is blowing right now. And the bones are going to rattle and rise, and you are going to come back to life. And the mistakes and the complacency and the fear, it's all forgiven and redeemed. There is new life on its way. You have another opportunity to live and to love and to rise again. It is possible, not because God always guarantees a perfect, glorious future, but God always promises to walk with us. God's there in the valley of dry bones. And if we can listen, we can stand up and walk toward a better future. I think this is our sacred calling right now in this moment of history. We are not the life-giving power of God, but we can be Ezekiel. We can speak words of hope. We can engage in hope-filled action. In fact, we already do. Because I think hope is simply love in action. It's doing what we know to be the right thing as we follow Jesus. And when we see it, we're filled with hope. We are already doing so much. Feeding the hungry, supplying the food bank with food. We have sent money, as so many other faith communities have, to people recovering from fire, from flood, from earthquake. We are standing up when people's lives are threatened, standing up when any issue to silence or suppress the lives of LGBTQ kids comes to the school board. We are there saying, no, these kids belong. We are loving. We are engaged in hope in action. Have you ever actually paused to think about how much love you can witness every day? We take it for granted, but it happens everywhere, every day. Every single morning, the sun comes to sustain and grow all that we need. Every morning, families all over the earth get up. They share breakfast. They send one another out into the world with love. Every day, people go to work, and not just because they're trying to put food in their families' mouths or money in their pockets. They're doing something to make the world, the community, better. It's love. Every single day, we share words of kindness and hope with one another. This is love. And it's not just us, it's faith communities and people all over the world, every day, doing small actions and larger actions to say that love is here. And that love that happens every single day is just as real as what we read about on the news. It is every bit as real. It's the source of our hope. America's joyous future is being made by the people who love each and every day. Cynthia Berjold says that our great mistake is that we tie hope to outcome. We think it's all about the future, but we don't need to wait on a hope in the future to come from someone else. Our hope is right here within us. When we listen to the voice of God and we respond, we can see hope in ourselves and we can see hope in one another. You know, Jesus experienced doom and destruction as well. I mean, yes, he predicted the fall of Jerusalem, but I'm talking about his own rejection and death. On the night of this last night on earth, he knew what was coming for him. He knew that he was going to die, and it was going to be one of the most painful and humiliating deaths that we human beings have ever devised. He could have responded with anger. He could have responded with despair, but he didn't. He could have said, I'm going to raise up an army with swords, and I am going to use violence to prevent all of this from happening. It's certainly what Peter wanted to do. But he said, no more of any of that. Faced with doom, Jesus chose love. He washed his disciples' feet. He shared a meal. He prayed. He sang. He forgave. Not just his betrayer, but everyone who put him on the cross. And he promised us, he promised all who followed after him that he would offer his Spirit, a Spirit that can empower us to love, to have courageous hope, even in the face of doom. This, to me, is our great hope. We just have to remember where to look. You know, I used to think that the best question, the most motivating question to ask was, what do you hope for, right? That it would get us moving in the right direction. But I'm not sure it's a great question. I think maybe better questions to ask are, where do you see hope right now? Who inspires your hope? Because where we see that hope, where we see love in action, that's as important as the tears we talked about last week to guide us to our own next right step. I see hope in the love that we share. I see hope in people loving one another well everywhere. I see hope in the flowers that are blooming and the trees that are coming back to life. They remind me of the resilience of the earth and the blessing of seasons. I see hope in people who plant gardens and tend bees. I see hope in people who want to compost. There's a request in here for coffee grounds. Right? I see hope in people of faith rising up all over the world to say the uglier it gets, the more beautiful we are going to become. Hope isn't out there in the future. It's the presence of God in each of us. It's a choice that we can make every single day to follow in Christ's footsteps, to choose some courageous love. That's the kind of hope that can be another cairn, another guidepost on the road to life after doom.